Hi everyone, it's Gary Nicholson here for the Mountain Weather Information Service Issue Planning Outlook updated on Friday evening the 17th of January. Now, after a lot of stormy conditions in recent times, high pressure finally is becoming the dominant story onwards into the week ahead. Still with a west or southwesterly flow, though, bothering Scotland in particular, which will bring some windy days still and some fronts in off the Atlantic, so it's not all plain sailing completely for the week ahead. There will be some inversion conditions in there at times, particularly more under the centre of the high across England and Wales. As we start the weekend, it's a chilly westerly airflow that's across the British Isles. We've got a polar maritime air mass that's come across the North Atlantic towards us, so you'll find that the terrain is extensively frozen and with a hard frost into many of the valleys and the glens over the course of this weekend too. This is the 850 millibar level. Now with higher pressure building in, it pushes that 850 level higher up in the atmosphere, and this chart then becomes a bit less useful to us because it's higher up than the highest Scottish summits. Actually, ironically, with higher pressure and an inversion setting up, it may well be that temperatures shown on this chart higher up than the Scottish summits could even be a few degrees higher than what you find on the mountains. Classic inversion setups once things do go anticyclonic. So not too much more we can get out of this chart for display purposes. Basically, just to say that temperatures on the mountains mostly above freezing through the week ahead. Some slight variations in the absolute temperatures day to day. Some western Scottish mountains, particularly where you're around banks of low cloud, may just hold close to freezing point. If you're above an inversion, you'll be several degrees above freezing, locally very mild indeed across the eastern side of the Highlands in the right sort of setup, with a bit of foehn effect across the Highlands from that. So snow loss will be ongoing through the week ahead. Initially the terrain is frozen, but as we go through the week ahead, there will be that gradual loss of snow. Lower slopes, most of what's around will go. England and Wales across the mountains as a whole, not too much left at all, I would have thought, through this week ahead, and very little to add to it for anything that comes in across the Highlands. So only slow changes then, I suspect, day on day through into the new week. Let's look at the charts then. This is Saturday. High pressure is starting to build and it'll become a very strong high eventually. A low pressure system cutting itself off and disappearing towards Biscay and Spain. There's the west by northwesterly wind and it'll produce a few snow and hail showers, chiefly across the north and west of the Highlands. One or two isolated ones elsewhere. It's still a brisk wind. It's still gale force across particularly higher Scottish mountains at the far north, seeing the strongest of the winds. Wales beneath the centre of the high, seeing the least of the wind through the day, and it'll tend to drop as well. Now for Sunday, high pressure is really building. The centre of the high in excess of 1045 millibars, I would have thought by this stage. A very strong high then building in. Fronts are being deflected towards the north of Scotland, but the southwesterly airflow that's coming in is quite damp, so it's likely to produce banks of low cloud across coastal hills in Scotland, filtering inland, and maybe some drizzly dampness on some of those coastal hills, not generally amounting to a great deal, but it could just clag things in with low cloud across those western Scottish mountains. Cloud breaking eastwards, and overall lots of sunshine for east and southern Scotland and much of England and Wales. Some low-level fog banks may be around, but mostly just confined into the valleys. Light winds then England and Wales, a brisk southwesterly for Scotland, strongest in the far northwest, where may touch gale force. Not a huge amount changing into Monday. The high stays across England and Wales, staying with that southwesterly feed across the Scottish Highlands, and still a damp air mass coming in to produce extensive very low cloud across western coastal hills, but with that inversion trying to be in place, I suspect most of the higher tops above any of that low cloud in Scotland, and the further east you go across the Highlands, the more it'll break up altogether. Some banks of fog in the valleys across England and Wales, the mountains generally all clear above that. In terms of temperatures, well, you might find that some slopes are close to freezing, particularly if you're around any of the low cloud in the West Highlands, generally above zero though on the mountains. In some places on the high tops above the inversion, you might be up to say 5 degrees or even above. Subtle variations day to day through midweek, mostly in terms of cloud and fog distribution. Weak fronts coming in off the Atlantic, pressure stays very high, centred broadly across the southern half of the British Isles. A westerly flow basically across Scotland, not looking quite as windy as the start of the week. Looks as though western mountains still clagged in with drizzle and banks of low cloud. Still a fair chance that the higher tops are above the cloud, even with this front in place. It may just be dregs of low-level moisture that are in place, allowing the inversion to keep the tops in the clear. valley fog is probably still going to be around across England and Wales too. Can't quite guarantee where the inversion height exactly gets to in the second half of the week. Wednesday's chart sees another trail of fronts basically just moving across the north of Scotland. Western Mountains again, low cloud and drizzle coming in. Eastern areas generally dry with the best of the cloud breaks. And England and Wales beneath the high, chances are the inversion is still in place here, so the hills are clear. Any fog is just at low levels and there's not too much wind. So the big picture as we head towards the end of the week, the high is centred just out to the west of Ireland. The general westerly flow around the top of the high still affecting Scotland with some weak fronts. Looks as though the high just begins to subside southwards slowly towards the end of the week and next weekend, allowing that westerly to strengthen again with some fronts coming off the Atlantic. Not the powerful weather systems that we've seen recently, but nevertheless you could still see the risk of gales on the mountains at times if that westerly does strengthen. The high still has some influence across England and Wales, where it should be generally dry. Most of any rain mostly confined to the west and northwest highlands. Now onwards towards next weekend and beyond, and the model's not entirely in agreement at this stage. What's trying to happen on one or two of the computer simulations is that it tries to get the high almost to stay a bit to the west of us. It tries to pull something of low pressure a bit further east, and you wouldn't rule out, even temporarily, to see a chillier north by northwesterly pattern get in. And the sort of chart shown here is a very tentative step towards that. The models at this distance average things out so badly, getting any detail is treacherous, but a few of the runs that keep coming out that we see throw in a northwesterly plunge, even if just for a few days. So as we get towards the very end of the month, wouldn't rule out a brief burst of much colder air, but I suspect it very quickly gets toppled away again as the high, which is to the southwest of us, builds back in and things trend towards being milder quite quickly. So I think if there is another burst of very cold air, it would be quite short-lived later in the month. So things still a bit mixed in the longer range, uncertainties as you might expect. In the shorter term, things are settling down somewhat compared to the very active weather we've seen recently. A bit more usable then in the week ahead for getting out on the mountains. And if you pick your day, pick your location, and you get above an inversion, it can bring you those really classic mountain scenes. So keep an eye on all your local details that we put out every day for that, and I'll update the video again at the start of the week. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.